Hello, and we're gonna talk about the structure expansion, well, the positioning of your expansion. Let's just say
I am not
that
afraid.
you're trying to gain a expansion.
It shall be done.
We have
Let me
secured
face
this
the
gold
peril.
mine. Now
What is it?
to our
At your
peasants.
call.
They will start
Yes,
working,
me lord.
but
What?
usually players will tend to, well, new players will tend to give this gap. This is a huge part of the gap. You have this kind of gap, and over here, you have two spaces the enemies can come and attack you in different places. But let's just say that you're smarter than
Yes,
that.
me lord. More work?
We're gonna build where there's a small spot that the enemy can squeeze through because a town hall has much more higher HP than normal structures.
What is it? Off I go then.
We're gonna build a tower
Righto. Yes,
that
me
will
lord.
help us aid in our upbringing of this expansion.
All right. Righto. Yes, me lord.
This will take a while, but it usually, while you're making an expansion, it will also uh, consistently multitasking
Job
for
done.
various other
What?
tasks.
More work? Righto. Off I go then.
Making this shorter gap for
Yes,
any
me lord.
units that can squeeze
Job
through
done.
here
Yes, me
will be
lord.
much more
More work?
possible. Farms are
Off I
also
go
an
then. What?
option. Lumber mill can also be an
Yes, me lord.
option. But
Yes,
as
me
you can
lord.
see, I've made a much more shorter gap for enemies to reach me.
Righto.
Since
What?
I've made myself much more
Yes, me
comfortable in
lord.
this position, only with the collision size of a peasant
What?
or a footman, ghouls, and any other smaller units can only squeeze through here then attack our peasants.
Yes,
In
me
later
lord.
stage of the
Job's
game,
done.
when you
More
have an
work. Job's
expansion,
done.
enemy players will tend to target only your
What?
peasants. Because so, expansions are very
Job's
weak
done. More work.
on
Yes, me lord.
possible uh, defensive possibilities. Let's just say we didn't build this lumber mill and this farm. We only built these two towers that only defending these sides. The enemy hero can also squeeze through
What
this
is it?
gap.
Let me face the peril.
Let's say
As you wish.
this is a enemy hero.
It shall be done.
A normal enemy hero will harass your peasants, take off their value, and you will be wasting more money than you gain. Since I've made this much more smaller, the enemy won't be able to attack this kind of gap
What would
because
you
of their
ask of me?
collision size is
For
much more
honor.
huger. The only possible way to attack this kind of defensive
Upgrade complete.
position is basically one gap or enemy air units.
At your call.
Let's say your
As you
main
wish.
army is away.
For honor.
The enemy decides to attack you in the right
What me
time
want?
where you were away.
Huh? Swobu, I am yours. I will hear and obey.
Let's say the enemy hero are gonna attack you and you didn't expect it coming. But since we've made the gap a little more smaller, the enemy
Quick,
cannot squeeze through and
yes,
will eventually retreat.
bring it on. Immediately.
For example, if
For
the
the
enemy heroes
tribes.
brings out much more larger
Well
units,
done.
eventually the
Immediately.
only target will
Start
be
running.
a smaller structure that easy to
More
destroy.
work.
But since
Yes,
we
me
have our
lord.
peasants here,
All right.
we can repair that
What is it? More
and
work.
stop their upbringing.
I am able to help.
Since we're repairing this
What?
and The
Ready.
enemy cannot attack that peasant because the gap is so small. Eventually, they will also retreat and might lose a unit or two. Since the enemy gap is much more larger, they cannot squeeze through, and your peasants are safe, and the enemy is left wounded.